Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the August version of the Oregon City Business Alliance Forum. Glad to see a lot of smiling faces. Also glad that it's 108 degrees outside. We've gone through a little bit of a heat wave, but at least we didn't have to deal with Hillary down in Southern California with mudslides and everything else that tropical storm brought in. It just seems like we're dealing with a lot of extremes lately with the Maui wildfires in Lahaina, massive tropical storms on the East Coast, and now mudslides in California in August. So get ready for what's next. I don't know what that might be. But we're glad to have you here today. We have a very interesting topic that we're going to be discussing. We have several panelists with a very diversified and distinguished backgrounds that are going to be bringing their knowledge in their particular field to you today. When you talk about our aging society, it's something that has been with us, obviously, for a long time. But recently, our population has started aging longer and longer and longer. And with that is some wonderful things that we get to spend more time with those that we love, but there are also consequences to all situations in life. And when you think about the entire relationship of a family member dealing with an aging individual, whether it's another family member, a friend, a neighbor, whoever it might be, there's so many emotions that are involved. And I'm going through it myself with my mother-in-law, just seeing how my wife is trying to work through that maze of when she says, "I can't hear you, I can't hear you." And my wife goes, "Well, Cynthia, do you have your hearing aids in?" "Oh, no, I forgot." It gets frustrating for her mother, and it gets frustrating for my wife, as well as a lot of other people. But anyway, glad we're here. Take some good notes. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, Petronella Donovan here with Asteria Garden Senior Living. Petronella, would you like to say a few words? Here, wait. Come on up here.
I just want to say thank you to everybody that joined us in person and also the people that are online. This is a great topic for me, so I'm excited to share what I have with all of you.
And Petronella, just so you know, has been in the industry for close to 30 years now, opening up her first facility, I believe, here in Oregon City, behind the Oregon City Hospital in 1997, was it? 1997. She's on our board of directors for the Oregon City Business Alliance, so we get to chat with her more in depth about this topic. But she's been back to Washington, D.C., giving testimony to a lot of committees on how we approach this very challenging situation that each and every one of us, if we're not facing it now, I guarantee you will be facing it at some time in the future. We also have Tiffany Gillespie with Providence, Willamette Falls. She's in charge of the Philanthropy now. I believe you've been with them for 18 years. About that? Well, at least that's what it said on my sheet. A long time. But she's going to be approaching it on a different direction from some of our other speakers. But we're very honored to have Tiffany also on our board of directors. She brings a lot of background, a lot of personal experience, a lot of knowledge, and we're truly fortunate to have you. So let's see, we have two of our electeds with us. State Senator Meek is sitting over here. And Mark is also going to be one of our panelists today. He'll be sitting up here, so feel free to ask him as direct questions as you'd like. And he's, by the way, a state senator for the state of Oregon. And Oregon City Commissioner Adam Morrow over here. Thank you, Adam. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tiffany first, and she's going to go ahead and get the ball rolling, and then we'll save all the questions for the end. The blue cards are your question cards, so feel free to go ahead and fill those out. If you have a question, and when it's done, go ahead and raise your hand, and someone from the Oregon City Business Alliance will swing by and pick that up. If you could print your question, it's a lot easier for us to make sure we're reading every word the way you intended it to be, and not trying to interpret what that word actually was. All right, Tiffany, with that being said, it's all yours.
Thank you. Yes, I do need that. So I'm at that age now where I need extra help to be able to read here. So thank you all for being here. Today we're highlighting a critical topic of our seniors, our care for our aging population, and the resources that we need to meet those demands. We're going to start with a level set on the population of Clackamas County, share why it matters to your business communities, and then transition to some of the challenges facing our aging population and some opportunities to engage in those solutions earlier rather than later. We'll finish our forum with some advice and resources available to you and your loved ones to consider as you build wealth, as you secure your own retirements, and as we all plan collectively for the next generation. So let's get to it. The rise of better, faster internet has given us many gifts. We have access to critical data sets for analysis and planning, such as U.S. Census, academic studies, and employment studies. We have stories that give us perspective and make us aware of the challenges facing our communities in ways that we have never had before. And an assortment of humor for everyone, including the ability to describe just about anything in pictures. I'd like to focus our level set on populations on three primary groups. We have boomers, those who were born between 1947 and 1965. We have Generation X, those who were born between 1966 and 1981. I am Generation X. And we have millennials, those who were born between 1982 and 1996. Pictured here is the evolution. You can feel the dramatic transition, which is reflective of our society. Or to put it another way, this is a throwback to my husband, action films. Let's just use action films to outline the change in our societies. From good old John Wayne and the Westerns, to the original Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom, anybody? To the current Avengers. Generations, how are generations relevant to our discussion for senior and aging? I want to level, this is the information that's really critical to our discussion today. So this comes from the Pew Research Center. It's a snapshot. Our population has seen dramatic swings since 1928. The population of boomers is nearly double that of the silent generation, providing a larger pool of those paying into social programs, such as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, general tax pools. It's also a larger pool of workers available for all of our employers. In about 1964, birth rates began a downward trajectory, resulting in Generation X population topping out at just 2/3 the size of its predecessor. That's 21 million fewer workers and fewer contributors. In 1981, it begins marking a new generation that we lovingly call the millennial generation. This population increased only slightly over the previous generation until its peak in 1990, matching the boomers, and then a slow but steady decline. Today, 2023, over 50% of the boomer generation have hit retirement age, defined as 65 years or older. However, if you adjust retirement age for professions that see a much earlier threshold for retirement, such as nursing, first responders, military, and other things that fit within those categories, you can see that the entire generation of boomers has been encompassed into retirement age. And you can also see that we start to penetrate Generation X by about 20%. The quick math suggests that we have a larger number of those at or in retirement compared to those of working age. The population of Clackamas County is 422,000 people and some change. Those of working age, that's those between 18 and 54 for purposes of argument, comprise 197,766, just under half. This does not account for those who have not yet entered the workforce. So if you age out or you less out those that are in higher education, trade school, maybe retraining programs, those who are unable to work or who are disabled, single income households, which is an intentional choice. Those of retirement age, including early retirement, number about 143,000 and some change. If you less out 18 to 24-year-olds, just as a general number, and count only those squarely in the working age group, it's nearly dead even, with the scales tipping every single year. This is what it looks like today in general numbers. The number of retired or those squarely in retirement age nearly equal to that of the available workforce. This balancing act has not played out in our economy before. The working age group has always outnumbered those in retirement. We have new challenges in this new territory. So why does it matter? As those who own, operate, and lead companies, for you, it matters significantly. According to publicly available tax data, there are 230,000 jobs in Clackamas County. This excludes those who are self-employed and seasonal labor. Our available workforce, ages 25 to 55, for sake of argument, comprises 71% of the population needed to fill the available jobs. We can infer a couple of things from this information. Number one, workers are traveling from outside the county for these jobs. Or jobs are going unfilled. If you have open positions in your company, you know what that feels like. Or our workforce is engaging or needs to engage to keep our aging workforce or hire younger workers and encourage them to enter the workforce earlier. We have an aging population that's outpacing our available workforce. Very impactful. What does this mean for the resources that are needed to care for those in retirement as their needs increase? There's healthcare, assisted living, rehabilitation, SNFs, long-term care. We could spend hours on just these topics alone, and we'll go a little deeper when Petronella and the panel come to speak with us. For now, I'd like to raise your awareness about just one topic that will impact every single person in this room. We're calling it the Great Wealth Transfer. That's not my term. It's a term that's out there in the marketplace. The Great Wealth Transfer describes the movement and control of assets, especially appreciated assets, in the United States from one generation to another generation. The transfer of appreciated assets includes securities and a significant amount of real estate. Actually, the majority of the wealth will be in real estate that gets transferred. I'm in the not-for-profit sector, charitable sector, and for us, we are anticipating large transfers of wealth to charities across the board. The sheer amount is expected to surpass $16 million, but the total expected transfer of wealth over the next 20 to 25 years is $84 trillion. That's a lot of money. Consider a moment that the shift of $84 trillion from the silent generation and the boomer generations to Generation X and the millennials. It is possible that we will see the millennial generation controlling the majority of wealth in this country. And here's why. Early data from estate planning organizations such as Free Will and others suggest that the majority of the $84 trillion in assets will pass from the silent generation, which is the smallest population, to Generation X. And assets from the boomer generation, which is significantly larger than the silent generation, will pass to the millennials. For the first time in history, it will not be the oldest generation controlling the majority of our economy's assets. The New York Times article published on CNBC stated it this way: the Great Wealth Transfer, approximately $84 trillion, will be passed to subsequent generations over the next 20 to 25 years, with only $16 trillion expected to pass within the next 10. So, in about 11 plus years from now, the vast majority of those dollars will start changing hands. Generation X is expected to inherit 30 trillion, and the millennials are expected to inherit $68 trillion. That's a lot of money. So why does that matter? Here's why it matters. The number of people paying into our systems of services and supports for our aging population is declining. And more people as more and more people are moving from working age into retirement age. The number of people drawing on those systems of services and support is greater, or will soon be greater, than at any other point in history. Social services have increasingly moved from private organizations, such as faith communities, hospitals, and personal homes, with funding more robustly from private sources, such as philanthropy, to government-funded services. A study released by the Business Journal on July 19th of this year cited a National Institute on Retirement Security study. It found 40% of Generation X had no savings. And the programs that are in place today were not in place when they started their careers. And of those that had savings, it was less than $40,000. It does underscore a tidal wave that's coming that will impact our social services. These tipping points played out also in philanthropic priorities. Boomers in the silent generation prioritize social services and health in their giving for organizations and services. This analysis was done by Blackbaud, which is the largest not-for-profit management software and research company in the country. Millennials are less likely to support social services and healthcare compared to Generation X. Consequently, Generation Z, who are the children of Generation X, are even less likely to prioritize health and healthcare and social services as those generations that came before them. If you think about the great wealth transfer moving to millennials and the charitable giving expected through those transfers, much of the $16 trillion that's expected to be donated is significantly less likely to meet the needs of our aging population, putting the pressure for funding back on public sources. The widening of the gap in resources is something that we really need to be paying attention to now, before it hits a crisis. The first superpower we need to tackle any problem is information. We reviewed the data of our current state, and we took a look at data projecting our future state. I'd like to turn the stage over to Petronella for a panel discussion and what the data really means in our day-to-day operations today. She'll walk us through the state of services for our aging population and the advocacy that we invite you to be a part of in the future. Petronella?
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate all that. And some of those numbers shocked even me. Wow. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our forum here. I'm going to say just a little bit about myself before I ask the panelists to come up. I don't know how many people know who I am, or I know you're not here to know who I am and what I do, but I'm going to tell you anyway, just because it is relevant to what we are doing here today. So I was born in Romania. My family immigrated back in 1978, in the spring of 78. They came here for a better life. And what I was instilled, with my grandmother and my mother was that to take care of our seniors. And that was always ingrained in me from the time I was a child. I always knew to respect my elderly. I always knew to, give that respect when you're walking in front of them. You do not do that. And all of the different things that I've learned throughout the years. So long story short is I started working at Willamette Falls Hospital. Where's Tiffany? Back in 96, I believe that was. And from there, Nels Peterson, who was the pharmacist there, took me over to Olson Pharmacy. So the people that are from Oregon City probably really knows where Olson Pharmacy was. And so working at Olson Pharmacy, I dealt with all of their long-term care. So I went into hospice care, to nursing homes, to ALFs, RCFs, all of the different communities. And I would talk about the services that Olson's provided. Well, in those facilities, it amazed me what I saw. And I said, well, you know what? I need to do this. I need to get on board and do one of these facilities and bring it home, if that makes any sense. So my wonderful husband, who is here, built our first one in 1997. And for the record, please don't do the math. I'm still 21. And our children are here too. They're over 21. I said they're now adopted. We built right behind Willamette Falls Hospital, and that's where we got started. That was our first facility. But I want to talk about the issues that we face today. And with that, I want to bring our panelists up because I'm going to be asking some of the questions that probably you all have and probably want to know what's the difference. What is an RCF? What is an ALF? What is Medicaid, Medicare? Oh, I thought that's covered. Workforce. I know Tiffany brought that up. You don't have to be in senior housing to know that there's a workforce issue. If you don't mind, I want Senator Meek, Theresa Sanchez, and Maryanne, remind me, sorry, because I'm going to butcher your name. Cassera. And I want them to tell a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll kind of go down and go on to the questions. Thank you, Matthew.
Should I stand?
No, you're fine.
Okay. I am Theresa Sanchez. I am a native Oregonian. I was born in the huge town of Dallas, Oregon. That little tiny town. I've lived in Oregon City for over, I want to say now I'm going to date myself, Petronella, 1995, somewhere in there. Worked at Willamette Falls myself. Lived right down the street from Willamette Falls, walked to the hospital when I gave birth to my daughter. So, small town. Recently we have moved, but I still work and own a business in Clackamas County. So, background, after working at the hospital, got my life coaching certification, got my health coaching certification for seniors health. My mom had a stroke and her stage 4 lung cancer returned, so we ended up moving her into our home and needed resources. She was of that category of Medicaid, didn't have any resources for her through her hospice journey. So thankfully we have a large family. We all pooled together and cared for her. I have 4 children. They were part of that pool. And so, there's a lot of us in this arena working with seniors. I am married for 30-something years. Don't know how long that is, but it's a very long time. And I work in placement. You'll hear that term a little bit interchangeable in the industry. Some people call us referral agents, placement agents, and senior advisors. So we handle a plethora of all of the resources that you need for your loved ones, find the quality care options, whether that be assisted living, adult care homes, memory cares, hospice, home health, whatever it is that you all need. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. My name is Maryanne Cassera, and I am a nurse. I have a connection with Petronella in terms of I've worked in adult care homes for most of my career. So prior to becoming a nurse, I was a caregiver and a resident manager for a small adult care home in Tualatin and Wilsonville. And that's where I had this awe-aspiring moment of what I wanted to do. So I decided to go into nursing. And I was working hard. I was working as a full-time caregiver, resident manager. I worked at OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University, for most of my adult life. Actually, I started there when I was 19 years old. And I was there until 2021 and at my current position at Providence, Newburgh. I'm a native Oregonian. I've lived here all my life, born and raised. In fact, I was born at St. Vincent's. So I have strong roots here. But yes, I learned about adult care homes and I fell in love with the care, providing care for seniors. That was my passion. and I wanted to do that as a nurse. So I became a nurse. I went to school at OHSU and got a job as a nurse case manager. And what I do is I meet the patient and their family at the day of admission. I follow them while they're in the hospital, and I collaborate with the doctors, the physical therapists, the occupational therapists. So my entire team, I'm almost like the quarterback of the team, right, with the patient as the center. And I'm actually working with folks like Theresa to help me figure out the next plan of care that, for my patient. Once they're done with the hospitalization, then what happens next? Do they go to a skilled nursing facility, so a SNF? You'll hear all these terms. We're probably notorious for acronyms in healthcare. EKG, SNF, ICF, ACH, all of these things. But yes, so they can go to a rehab facility, they can go home with home health, they could probably transfer to a higher level of care hospital, or maybe a long-term care hospital, such as Fibra, for example, for rehab. So I do a lot. I'm like I said, I'm like the quarterback, but the patient is actually in the center. And this is why this topic is so important to me. We have so many patients and family members that are like, what do we do, right? You think, oh, okay, mom is gonna get older and maybe she'll go to assisted living and so forth and so forth. But what if it's crunch time? What if mom was living at the assisted living and then she starts developing hip issues and maybe she has some cognition issues?
So Maryanne, we're going to get all into that.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have the whole presentation myself. But I'll pass it on to Senator Meek. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Meek. I'm the small business owner here in the metro area, Clackamas County. Been in business, in the real estate business, for over 27 years now. And it's been through my role of being engaged with our local chambers, my real estate brokers, that I started getting involved with public policy and government affairs. And through that process, became elected in 2016 as a state representative, and most recently last year as a state senator. And part of my work and engagement has been, one of my first transactions in 1997 or 1998 was helping one of my clients purchase an adult foster care home. And imagine you have your normal residence, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. I walk into this monstrosity of a home that has 7 bedrooms and 5 full baths, a huge big kitchen and a living room, and they have, some shared capacity, some individual. But it was just these 3,000, 4,000 square foot homes, and I didn't understand the process of it, even to how to evaluate them. But through that process, because licensing was important, you had to be licensed before you buy the home. There was a lot of contingencies. So I'm familiar with the adult foster care delivery system. And more importantly, more recently, when my mother was in failing health and needed more round-the-clock care, I was able to, through Petronella's help and referrals, find a home I was able to get her into. And she has since passed. But I do know one thing: there's the care facilities, and then there's also these adult foster care homes. To me, the best delivery system for intimate care is adult foster care. So one of the things I'll be talking about is some of the legislation I'm working on to help more care homes to be, to remain in that industry, and also make it a little easier, a little more economical to be viable, but hopefully introduce and make opportunities for future providers. And so in 2017 and 18, I did introduce legislation that I'll talk about in a little bit here further.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to start with the first question. Actually, I'm going to direct it to Theresa. What is this RCF, ALFs? Can you tell us what is an adult foster home? Other states don't have them. So can you run through briefly, because we could be here all day.
I could talk about this all day.
Yes. So run through
Every
the different
day.
systems. What do we
Yeah.
have here in Oregon?
Yeah, so there is a sheet on your table that also has a snippet of a definition. It's not all inclusive, but an RCF is a residential care facility, which sounds like it would be an adult care home, but it's not. An RCF might provide more complex care, such as if somebody's had a stroke and they're no longer able to speak, or they need feeding assistance, or They're just a little bit higher complex care. I like to look at that as a bridge between assisted living and a skilled nursing. Adult care homes, or as Senator Mark Meek said, adult foster home, we're getting away from the foster home term because it has a negative connotation in our society. So adult care homes are small settings, home-like settings. They have a maximum of 5, unless that got approved for 6, but so far it's 5 residents in the home. And the caregivers ratio is much better than you would find in a situation like an assisted living or a memory care setting. Oftentimes they are nurse-owned homes, so they have a little bit higher skill set. Some of them are CNA-owned homes, or people who have owned homes because they've worked in the industry for many years and they want to contribute. And then you've got something like a memory care, which really specializes in the dementia diagnoses. You cannot be admitted to a memory care without a dementia diagnosis. So that could mean Alzheimer's, it could be Lewy bodies dementia, frontal lobe dementia, whatever dementia you've been diagnosed with. These are locked facilities. They are locked for safety, so we can mitigate any wandering risks. And the caregivers there are specifically trained in dementia care. And so are adult care homes. The state does have very similar requirements for each of these settings for the caregiver training.
So follow up to that, Theresa, I get a lot of questions, why can't I move into a DD home? What's the difference between the DD home and an adult foster home? And then how about independent living? Where does that come in? Is there a hospice? Where does that fall in? And a little bit about that.
Adult care homes are specific to ages, the age range of 55 and older. Some homes have been known to accept someone of a younger age with an exception. The DD homes are for under that age group, so they're a little bit different. Their qualifications, their licensing is a little bit different. Yes, developmental disability.
Sorry, we're the acronyms. We're so used to it. This is the way we talk. That's our lingo.
Not on your list.
Thank you, Senator.
An IL, or independent living, is essentially a community setting for people over the age of 55 that really do not have any care needs. They want to live in an environment where there are like-minded people. They have activities. There might be a pool. There might be a golf course. There might be, fun things for them to do, but they really don't have any care needs. These homes are not licensed the same at all. These are apartment settings. These are essentially real estate. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And they oftentimes will have activities. They take you on outings. It's very interactive. You might find that your parent isn't ready for an assisted living setting. They don't need care, but boy, they're lonely.
And just to follow up, sorry, I'm interrupting because I'm trying to go through all my questions. Mm-hmm. But the activities part, you find that in all settings. It doesn't matter if you're in assisted living or if you're an independent or a residential care facility.
All settings, they're just set differently for the ability of the person that is living in those community settings. Even in the adult care home, there are some activities. It's just not at the scale as a large independent community.
I'm going to move on. This one's going to go to Senator Meek. What strategies do you believe are essential for addressing the challenges posted by the silver tsunami in Oregon, particularly in terms of healthcare, housing, and social services? What can you light a little bit about? I know we can go here all day.
That's a very loaded question. There is a lot to unpack there. Just beginning with healthcare, difference between Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid is for somebody that needs aid, that is under the legal, age limit to receive and qualify for Medicare, which is, depending on your age limit and when you were born, 65 to 67. And I think 65 you have to enroll, I believe now, depending on what age is. But Medicare now is our federally funded healthcare system, your health insurance, and there's supplemental parts A, B, C, and D for dental and everything else. But part of the state's role is, part of our Medicare and our Oregon Health Plan is to make sure we set up and prop up care facilities and care providers that can both afford to provide the good quality care and that can remain viable and solvent at the same time. And so in some cases, we actually set rates and limits of what they can charge for certain, procedures and different things. And the same thing with prescription drugs. If anybody's over 60, it's almost 70 now, you may have a whole cabinet full of just pharmaceuticals that you have to take to regulate your health over a period of time. So that is what's happening these days. And so we are working at the state to find an affordable way and process to do that. Because if we were able to, as we are and can be more efficient in vetting it out, both in an equal process, you can kind of level out the costs instead of making the costs more expensive for certain age groups and less or more than the others. So healthcare is a big issue, but the other thing is part of healthcare is housing and how you live and who is caring for you. And so, like I mentioned before, I introduced one of the best, the resident care facility. We mentioned earlier the ratio of resident to staff, I think, is close to 23 to 30. 30 residents to one staff member. In a care home, a resident care facility, or what's it called now? I know that, adult care home. See, I was old school adult foster care, but yes, adult care home, that the ratio is more like almost, 1 to 5, yeah, if not even more, because sometimes you have to have, during certain periods of time, you may have to have another person on with you to help just manage different things, feeding and bathing and different things. So the ratio is much greater. But when we spoke about developmental disabilities, when I introduced the bill to increase the limit from 5 to 7, the developmental disability community came out of the woodwork opposing the bill, saying that they thought they were under threat, that they would be begin to be isolated, and that we were going to put in this kind of a mill of housing where they would just be lost and forgotten. And so I had to kind of let them know that this was more of a delivery system for our aging community. So anytime you introduce legislation, you always have concerns and you have to be very specific. So navigating and working through that, I introduced a bill, Senate Bill 1101, I think this year, was to raise that. We had, unfortunately, a walkout that kind of mitigated and eliminated opportunities for committee hearings and all the rest to get it across the finish line. So I have 2 priority bills that I can introduce this year, and one of them is to increase the limit to 6. Washington State is up to 7 or 8. Arizona, the same thing. California, even, I think 7 or 8 or 9. And if you think 1 to 23 versus 1 to 9 ratio, I think the 1 to 9 is actually pretty healthy, and most likely the economics of it make it more easier to manage and maintain. So we're looking at all those figures because it's harder and harder to run a good business with just only 5 residents to help pay for the cost of everything to run that home and provide the care. So that's just in a nutshell some of the things we're working on. And also the other thing is with your limited resources, if you have Social Security and then Medicare and you need to go into a home, a lot of times you don't have the resources to pay for the home. And so we are looking at a mechanism in which that DHS, we may backfill Department of Human Services with funding so that they can supplement some of our seniors so that we can get them into good health, good care and good homes where they can be fed, bathed, and also have the companionship that many of them seek. So hope that answers a little bit.
Thank you. Yes, I know it's a big, broad topic, and we can be here all day to discuss it because definitely, a lot of the people that want to utilize it, especially we shock them, we sticker price them. What does it cost to be an adult foster and what does it cost to be an assisted living? The cost, and then when you come in, well, wait a minute, I have Medicaid. And then they even get that wrong. Oh, I've got Medicare, does that cover it? I'm 65 now. And so a lot of those questions, I know, Theresa, you put some of that on the piece of paper there in front of them, but we can come back and go through that. But another one that I want to bring over to Maryanne, workforce. What does that look like? I know, for example, we're talking about foster care homes. Since December of last year till today, we had close to 50 adult care homes close. And so what does that mean going forward? And then assisted livings and ALFs and the RCFs. I know they have open beds, but they're not getting those patients in there. Can you give us a little bit snapshot of what's going on there and what, I know you've done personally.
Right, and actually Petronella and I and Alexandra, we went to DC to do some lobbying on our own. So I was going into the discussion about what I do in the hospital, right? So I manage the discharge care plan. Getting that patient from the hospital to the next level of care can be problematic. I may have beds in the community, and when I mean beds, I mean perhaps it's a skilled nursing facility, or maybe it's assisted living or an adult care home. But the problem is not having enough staff or caregivers. For example, I may have a skilled nursing facility that says, oh yeah, I have plenty of beds, but we're kind of low on staff, including possibly a therapist, physical therapist. COVID taught us that we had a lot of sick calls from COVID and so forth, so we really struggled. So what happens is that patient ends up living in a hospital, right? The hospital is supposed to be in and out for acute care. It's an acute care hospital, right? But there are some situations where the patients are living there. I mean, just a gentleman, for example, I'm going to give a generic case study. 80-year-old gentleman who is bedbound, needs a Hoyer lift, no behaviors. Okay, this is just like a very vanilla case person, right? And what happens is I can't get him to a rehab because he doesn't meet the criteria for rehab, okay? If I try to get him to an adult care home, they need 2 people. Well, in theory, they could use 1, but 2 people to be safe to manage a Hoyer lift, a mechanical lift. So I need to be able to think about maybe an ICF level of care. And this patient is waiting and waiting and waiting, and in the meantime, he's taking up that bed that maybe your mom or your grandmother needs, right, for an acute care. And that also, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because another problem is not only the workforce, right? We don't have the caregivers out there. Some of these adult care homes, they need 2 or 3 caregivers. Maybe they have residents that have night needs and they need to have somebody awake. Oh no, I can't take that patient because I don't have the staff. So we are desperate for staff. We're in the skilled nursing facility, everywhere, right? And even in our restaurants, right? Our care facilities, our care homes, our SNFs, we are desperate for this. And so when we were in DC, we were thinking about how could we, get that seasonal workers, so there's a special visa, and I won't go into that because that's a whole new topic also, right? But those visas are lottery, and there's like maybe once or twice a year. But how can we get a percentage of those visas for caregivers? I have a cousin in the Philippines that would be a fantastic caregiver. She's a teacher, her husband's a principal, they have 4 kids, and she says, if I was able to go to America and be a caregiver, I could make more to support my family. On the other hand, and on that hand, she would be a fantastic caregiver. There's, so we need these folks. We need to figure out a pathway to bring these folks over, Romania or Philippines, Mexico, bring them here, because then we can satisfy those requirements in the community.
And I follow up on that. I know, Senator, you actually are working on that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
No, thank you, and thank you for mentioning that. I was in Indianapolis last week, part of the National Conference for State Legislators, and one of the National Conference of State Legislators, what they do as a group of state legislators around the whole state, we as a group and a body lobby to Congress about bills that would help our local communities and our states. And one of the things we did was make a mandate or request to Congress that they increase the limits for visas and work visas, so that we can, as you can tell, the ratio of workers and folks that are retired is greatly swinging in the wrong direction. And so we're going to have to look at a different pool. And we do have qualified, really caring folks around the world that would love to come here and service us and work for us, but we just don't have the workforce in order to do it right now. And so we're looking at different avenues and ways in which to, increase our workforce. So the next time you talk about immigration, know that there are some really good immigration policies that will actually be beneficial. If you think about our baby boomers and the wealth they have, what's happening, part of our recessionary issues, and I was at a forum regarding that, is that our retirees are not working, but they have wealth and they're spending money. So all these ramifications, they have cash. So increasing the interest rates is not hurting them. They're still spending, they're still consuming, but it's our workers right now that are having a harder time. So we're looking at different ways and advocating for different ways to help mitigate and allow our workers to be able to purchase homes and cars and things while, meanwhile, service our aging population in a very healthy way. So just to be continued.
I wanted to add to that, Senator. Oh, excuse me. So we are losing, I have a friend who owns a care home, and she pays way above competitive rate, right? So we're looking at $17 to $18 an hour. We're losing caregivers to like maybe Amazon driving or remote work, right? You see where I'm getting at? So we don't have the caregivers in these facilities because they're doing something else, because caregiving is emotionally and physically hard and challenging. I know, I was a caregiver for 20 plus years before I became a nurse. And this is the reason why I became a nurse, is because I needed something. It's like my back was killing me, and now I'm in case management. But that's it. We need these folks to do this type of work. It's not glamorous work whatsoever, but someone who has the heart and soul to provide that care for that elder. They want to do this, but it's not sustainable. And we need those other folks that can kind of fill in the gaps.
Thank you. And I was going to say, Theresa, you probably want to bring, you place these people.
Yeah.
And, when you have somebody going into an RCF and you see half the building is empty, they do have a bed. How often do you see that? And take us through that.
So stepping back a little bit. So when I left Providence while I'm at Falls, I actually started working in a in-home care agency. And so for 10 years, I ran in-home care agencies. I owned in-home care agencies. I trained caregivers. My last company, I had 60 caregivers, and my responsibility was training them and retaining them, right? So, retaining a caregiver, it can be very difficult. Sometimes they're college students. They just need to, they're getting their CNA license or getting their nursing degree. They need this hands-on experience. So you find yourselves as an employer, I got to keep these people on staff. I've got to keep them happy. So you're running around town to all of their homes or wherever they're working, and you're giving them $5 Starbucks cards. You're giving them whatever you can to make them happy, because it's a thankless job most of the time. And so, just giving you a little background of more of my experience in the adult care homes, in the community settings. I get excited when I'm touring with a family and I walk down the hallway and I see caregivers in the hallway and they're looking up and they're smiling and they're happy, and
Theresa,
know.
I hate to interrupt you, but I got my 5-minute mark from Tiffany over here. But I do want to bring, before we wrap it up, tell me prices, because I think everybody here wants to know, what is it going to cost me to go into one of these facilities?
So one of my challenges the last few years has been to re-educating our case managers on the cost of care for adult care homes. They call me up and there's this.
I want it across the line, though. I want
Across the line,
RCFs.
yep. So I'm just going to say, so an adult care home 3 years ago could have been $5,000 a month. Now it's ranging average $7,500 to $12,000 a month in an adult care home setting.
How many people knew that was happening? I see a bunch of...
Yeah, and long-term care insurance may or may not cover an adult care home, depending on your policy, a portion. Assisted living, about the same price. Everything's starting to even out a little bit across the board. And memory care, the same price. An RCF might be a little higher, more like $7,500 to $15,000 a month, depending on the level of care. In-home care caregivers, when I owned my company, we charged for 24-hour care, around-the-clock caregivers in your home was $26,000 to $30,000 a month. So the cost of care is extreme. I used to love going to financial advisors and speak to them because they weren't preparing their clients for long-term care adequately. So those are the things that I used to share.
And
True
picking
cost of care.
Teresa, picking up on that note, I know we have an attorney that can actually speak about that and what that planning should look like and what we need to do now before we actually get into, a situation, somebody had a stroke and now what? So I'll hand this back to Tiffany, and then she can introduce our next speaker, and then we'll come back for question and answers after this.
Thank you. Not to be a downer, but reality is that we really need to be paying attention to the information, to the future, to the things that are coming. So you have question cards on your table. Kent had referenced those. So if you would like to ask a question during the Q&A, go ahead and fill that out. Just raise it up, and one of us will come and pick that up from you, and we'll do the Q&A after our final speaker. You also have on your table a handout, a series of QR codes. These QR codes take you to free resources available out in the marketplace. Small Business Administration for closing your business or selling your business. Barbur Law from our next speaker. They have some great tools on their websites. There's a couple of free resources for estate planning also, if you haven't started to explore that. So I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. This is Eric Smith. He's going to close our session. He's an attorney with Barbur Law. They have offices in Tillamook and Milwaukie. Eric is an avid basketball and football fan. I will not name the teams because we do want him to speak, but he specializes in estate planning, and he's a graduate of Lewis and Clark. He practices probate and trust administration, guardianships, conservatorships, among other things. He has a special attention to wills, revocable living trusts, and other critical estate planning documents. We'd like to invite Eric up to kind of give us an overview of the things that we should all be thinking about.
Oh, thank you very much. As she said, I'm an attorney at Barbur Law, offices in Milwaukie and Tillamook. So if you come to see us in the Milwaukie office, I will be the attorney you will likely be working with. I'm going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes or so we're not going to get too in-depth into anything. But just really what I want to leave you with is that estate planning has benefits for you both now and for your beneficiaries later. It's something that I really encourage you to start thinking about, to start engaging in planning, because it can really have a big impact on your beneficiaries and the experience that they have upon your passing. I will also say that we do, and many other estate planning attorneys, do free initial consultations. I really encourage you to take advantage of that. It's a great way to get some information without having to commit to anything and be able to help you just start planning. So first I'm going to get into some of those documents that are more important during your lifetime. So first here we'll see the power of attorney. So this is a document that will allow you to name an agent, someone that you really trust, to be able to act on your behalf, to make sure that you are taken care of. The document can be very limited, so you can limit it to specific transactions, but it can also be very broad and inclusive to cover everything that you need someone to be able to do on your behalf. You can make it so that your agent can act immediately, so they can, upon signing it, take that down to the bank and use that to be able to start helping you. They've got that fiduciary duty to you, so everything they do has to be for your benefit, but they can immediately start helping. You can also limit it to only allowing your agent to help you once you've been deemed incapacitated. So you have quite a bit of flexibility in what you allow your agent to do. Also, if you have a business, this is also another time to really start thinking about what happens to your business if you become incapacitated. Do you have a plan in place that will allow the business to continue to thrive? Or is it just kind of an informal, this is what I hope happens, and the person doesn't actually have any ability to be able to help you with your business. So these are just kind of things to really start to think about. Next up is the advanced directive. So this is a document that does a couple things. One, it allows you to name that trusted person that you want to make those healthcare and personal decisions on your behalf if you become incapacitated. So as long as you have capacity, you will make your own healthcare decisions. And then it also will give you the ability to leave some instructions to your healthcare representatives. So some of those end-of-life instructions, if this certain situation happens, do I want this kind of life-sustaining procedures or not, as well as just some of those general instructions, if you're incapacitated, just things that would help them make decisions for you. And so with those two documents, keep in mind that if we don't have those things in place, then it will become potentially a whole process where a court will get involved to appoint a guardian conservator. Anytime you get a court involved in anything, I can tell you it's not going to be a quick process and it's not going to be cheap. So these are documents that you can get in place that are fairly cost effective, can really save you and your loved ones a lot of troubles, making sure you're taken care of. So just generally, when you do estate planning, you'll either go a will plan or a trust plan. In either scenario, your documents will allow you to name people that you trust to administer your estate. You'll also be able to, if you have minor children, name a guardian that you would trust to raise your child the way you would want them to be raised if you were unable to. You're able to direct distribution, so where your stuff goes and how it goes, as well as potentially doing some estate tax planning and other things. So jumping in, it's good to start with probate. What is it? What kind of triggers it? So probate is really that court-supervised process that will help distribute your assets of the decedent to where they need to go. So to trigger that, you have to own the asset at the time of your passing, and it really doesn't have kind of an automatic mechanism to transfer on its own upon your passing. So some of those kind of automatic mechanisms I encourage you to talk to professionals before you start doing some of these things because it can have consequences. But for example, having that home with a spouse, you own it as husband and wife, potentially, and you've got that automatic right of survivorship. So upon a spouse passing, the home will become fully owned by the surviving spouse. But then upon that surviving spouse passing, there is no longer that automatic mechanism unless you've taken additional steps to get it transferred to the next level. So then that home, upon that second passing, would need to go through probate. Another example is like bank accounts, investment accounts. Same kind of thing. If both of you are on there with that right of survivorship, upon that first passing, the account will just automatically transfer to the surviving spouse. And then if you name some beneficiaries on the account, so upon both of your passings, the account will automatically transfer outside of the probate process. That can be really beneficial, but it can also come with some things to be aware of. For example, if you've got just the one child and you've got your child on there as that beneficiary and the child should predecease you, and we don't do anything else, again, upon your passing, that asset will end up needing to go through probate because there's no longer a surviving beneficiary on there. For example, if you also have two children and one of your children should predecease you, and for your planning, you would want that child's share to go to their children, your grandchildren. Well, if we haven't done anything else, they're just going to see that there is one surviving beneficiary, and we're potentially in a situation where just the surviving of your children is going to receive that asset. And then if they try to correct things themselves, you can get into some gift tax things and other issues. So we just really want to always be aware that we have a plan and that everything we're doing kind of matches that. So what happens if you don't have an estate plan? A lot of people are concerned about this. They're worried that things will just go straight to the state. That's not the case. So we'll first look at the intestacy statutes to determine who your heirs are and where your assets will go through the court process. The downside of that is really that you don't have your say in who you want to get your assets through that process, where you want things to go. Now that plan might work for you, but it also might not. I mean, we're human, we all have things going on, and so that plan might not work for you, but generally it looks to first, is there a spouse? If there's no spouse, it'll look to are there children? If no children, parents, and just kind of keep branching out until it can find someone. And it's kind of only at that point, if it can't find someone, that things could potentially end up going to the state. Another thing that people often are confused about is that they say that I have a will, and so they think that they will be avoiding probate. But in actuality, having a will means you will be going through probate. Now, not all the assets necessarily have to go through probate, but anything that goes through probate will be controlled by that will. Some of the potential downsides of probate on here. Probate is a public process, and so everything that you have going through there will become public knowledge. So it kind of gets away from keeping things private. People are going to see your will. They're going to, if they look, they're going to see who you trust to get through the process, who you're leaving things to, who you're leaving out of that. There'll be an inventory, so they'll see your assets, they'll see your creditors, all of that kind of stuff that people typically want to keep private. Also, as I said, when you get a court involved in things, it's not a quick process. So it will be time consuming. Generally, it'll be around 9 to 12 months. Can be shorter if things are really smooth, can be much longer if there's fighting, you're trying to sell a business, those kind of things. The court is involved in every step of the process. And so with that does come increased attorney fees and costs. They're there for making sure you've got that inventory, that you're providing notice, that you are doing your due diligence on creditors. They're going to look at, when you do accounting documents, everything you've done to make sure that everything's done. But also they've got to sign off on that you have done everything, you're ready to make distributions. And so they're just very involved in making it time consuming and costly. Typically, probates will end up around that $5,000 mark, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, but it can be very costly to go through it. Now, sometimes having the court involved can be a good thing if you've got some potential fighting, just to make sure that you do have someone watching over things and making sure things are done properly. Another issue that a lot of people don't consider is that when you have assets in multiple states, and you have a will and things need to go through probate, you may have to go through multiple probates in each state. And so it's not just one time through, you're doing it multiple times, getting that hit on costs and fees, and just taking overall a longer time. And so there is a lot of things that happen through probate that can make it a little bit inefficient. But having said that, a will and a trust, they will both allow you to do kind of the things you need to do. A will just kind of state that, this is what's going to happen upon your passing. And so it, again, only controls those things that go through probate. Whereas with something like a revocable living trust, the trust will actually essentially own your assets. You will transfer the assets to the trust. And then as the trustee of the revocable living trust, you will kind of retain that control and manage things essentially as you do now. So nothing really at the end of the day feels like anything is changed, but it is all kind of done through that trust. The trust will also allow you to name those successor trustees, so that when that time comes where you're unable to manage your own assets that are in the trust, that successor trustee can kind of just step right in and make sure everything is taken care of, and kind of prevent that lapse or the time that it takes to get things through probate. They can just kind of really step in and either make sure that you are taken care of, or that they, if you have passed, make sure that they're following your wishes and getting things where you want them to go. And then that successor trustee, again, upon that passing, will follow that agreement. So you've got quite a bit of say in what you want to happen. So though, again, with the trust, those assets will pass outside of the probate process. You've got quite a bit of flexibility. Generally say that anything that you want to do that is legal, you can pretty much make happen through the documents. So whether that's just an outright distribution to beneficiaries that you are comfortable with them getting money outright, you don't have some concerns that they might spend the money inappropriately, burn through it, have any addiction issues or anything like that. But you can also kind of keep it in the trust and dole it out over time. So the trustee can also, for those minor beneficiaries, make sure that they are taken care of. And upon turning that age of majority, if you decide that at that age they're able to get that outright distribution, you can do that. But you can also kind of control the distribution, whether that's, at a certain age, they get a certain percentage. At the next age, so 25, they get a third, 30, they get the other third, and 35, they get the remaining third. You've got the ability to do that to make sure that, if they don't properly use it the first time around, there's still money there for them at the end that hopefully they will use the money wisely. You can also do it in intervals. So whether that's upon your passing, you can say, immediately they'll get something, a couple years later they'll get something, same concept. You can just make sure that money is there to make sure that they are taken care of. And then through the trust, there's some protections that are there for the beneficiaries. So whether it's the spendthrift provisions that will protect assets in your trust from your future beneficiaries' creditors. They can't reach into your trust to satisfy those debts. Whether there's some special needs planning that you can do to ensure that an individual that is on any benefits will remain eligible while still getting some of the benefit of what you've left to kind of supplement them. You can also require beneficiaries to create other trusts to keep property separate. If you give it outright and they commingle things, it will kind of no longer be separate. So you've got the ability to make sure that property does stay separate. You can also have different requirements, such as educational classes or drug testing if you have any concerns there, that will kind of make sure that, again, that money is used in a way that you want. So a lot of flexibility, but with that also balancing that there is an administration aspect to things and the burden that what you are wanting to do. So if you wanted to leave 1% a year for 100 years, probably going to try and talk you out of that because of the burden and it just not really making a whole lot of sense. And then when you do have a business, there are some kind of additional things to think about. What happens when the business transfers? Who's going to continue to operate? Are there remaining owners? Do you need to sell the business to a third party? Or are there employees that you'd want the business to ultimately go to? Do you want the business to stay within the family and have that transfer to family? Or is the business simply you and what you produce, and there's no value really in the name, and you just want the business to terminate upon your passing? And then kind of thinking how you want that ownership to actually pass, whether it's gradual and over time, whether it's just you've decided to retire and everything goes out, or is it something that you want to stay a part of the business, until you're passing, up until the very end. You've got those decisions to kind of start thinking about and making that a part of your overall estate plan. Also, taking into account, if you do decide to retire, do you need income from the business still? Do you just, that one-time lump sum, will that make sure that you're taken care of? Does the business have enough liquidity? So if someone needs to be bought out, do we need to discuss some life insurance option, those kind of things. So there is, owning the business, there is a lot more to really consider. And so that is really, like I said, just a quick, easy, not getting too in-depth into things. But again, I just want to leave you with, if you do have questions, a lot of estate planning attorneys, we do this, they've got that free initial consultation. So I really do encourage you to take advantage of that. Go get some information. It's really a great way to start the planning process and just really start thinking about these things and getting that plan in place.
Thank you, Eric. A lot of great information there. And you got it just for the price of a lunch today. How about that? What a deal. We really appreciate you going into as much detail, Eric, as you did, because those are questions that a lot of us have. We really aren't sure where to go to get all the answers. So you kind of summarized it for us. So I'll be making my appointment next week.
Kent, I want to just say
Oh,
one.
fire away.
We run to those problems all the time, where people don't know the difference between a will and a trust, and what that looks like, and then they're stuck in my facility, and now the family's arguing between each other. We get that all the time. It's kind of like us business owners. We think we have an LLC, we're covered. It's kind of the same thing. So that is very, very important. Get it done now while you can.
And I might have you, Eric, go ahead and grab a chair from over there and join our panelists. Because some of these questions that I've been given will be directed towards you. So as you're moving on over there, let's get started. And this goes to all the panelists. We'll let you decide, who would like to respond, or if all of you would like to respond. We talked about in Tiffany's presentation about the aging of our society and the size of the different groups, the Gen Zs, the Gen X, millennials, baby boomers, the silent generation. Where do we fit right now, today, with the amount of retirements and aging of the boomer generation, with the amount of care facilities that are available to address that need? Is it being met? Do we have a surplus? Or sounds like we've got a real shortfall with workforce, but where are we?
I think all of us can answer this. We definitely have a shortfall, especially here in Oregon. In the next 10 to 15 years, we don't have enough housing for the amount of seniors that are going to be able to need them. I don't know, Mark, if you want to touch on that, on housing at all, but we don't have enough housing.
Yeah, definitely, not only in this age bracket and the aging population, our baby boomers, we just don't have enough housing, period. So, and especially when you're thinking about functional housing, because a lot of, and I see Patty out there, Patty Gage, and a lot of our aging population, they want a single level home because they're not able to, to traverse stairs and different things. We're seeing mechanics and mechanical stairs and, ways to navigate a home. But beyond that, most of the people are living in a 2,000 square foot home. And as you're getting older, you don't need all that. But we don't have enough of the housing that would actually provide both functional and or economically feasible housing. So those are some of the things we're looking at, and we're definitely in trouble. So we have to be looking at these different segments as our population grows older.
Yeah, and a little bit to play off of that, the biggest need is for the low-income senior for housing and care. Because of the Medicaid reimbursement rate, there's just not enough care homes and facilities willing to contract with Medicaid. So if they're getting $8,000 for, Mr. Smith with dementia and memory care, and Medicaid is willing to cover $2,800 per month, what's the math? They're not going to accept Medicaid.
And I just want to add to that, that's why a lot of these adult care homes are closing, because those Medicaid rates, they can't make the business work.
One thing I wanted to mention is a new type of housing that I've been working with. It's one of my clients that had an adult care home, and they retired, they got out of the business, but this big, huge house was available. Nobody wanted to rent a 7-bedroom, 6-bath home. So what we did, and I'm working with seniors right now, the only way you can discriminate in housing is by age. And so we made these communities 55 or older, and in interviewing and running applications for them, a lot of our seniors that are getting benefits average about $1,500 to $2,000 a month. And just to rent a single, apartment is about $1,200. So we have a shared housing mechanism where their rent is $800. They share all the expenses. They have a shared kitchen, but they have their own private bathroom. But this is a new type of housing that we need to explore and become, and if there's any elected officials from the city, Mr. Marl, Commissioner Marl out there, we need to, in your planning division, the planning departments need to take a look at these different mechanisms, because you're going to need multiple baths and rooms to help, and that they don't provide. This is independent living, but they just need, the affordability index is off the charts. And this is an actual affordable way to house them in a shared capacity.
I think one of the things that I'm seeing, especially in Yamhill County, and I'm sure it's the same thing here in Clackamas, is that a lot of folks will say, oh, I'm going to sell my home and get my RV and live in an RV or live in a trailer. And then we see that in the hospital setting, it's like that is not the most appropriate care, you know, or a home or living situation for that person, who now has to use a walker and has to have a wheelchair and can't fit in those hallways. So we really need to think about getting that information to that individual, think about housing, think about caregivers. A lot of people want to stay in their personal homes. Caregivers, as Theresa said, are very expensive. Agencies are like $40 an hour, so you do the math, right? So we need to think of that pathway to get these folks from, you know, other countries that they may not necessarily charge $40 an hour. Maybe they're charging $25, right? The other thing, too, that we need to address this in the legislature is getting the information. Apply for Medicaid sooner than later. Don't wait until you land in the hospital and you're in a traumatic situation. Now I need long-term care. Now I need to go to an assisted living. Now what? I mean, and the problem is that application, has anyone ever seen that application? It's close to 60 pages. It's so overwhelming. When I give it to a family member, like, okay, fill this out and we'll get you on Medicaid, and it takes 45 days, maybe more, and they're living in my hospital because they're filling out that application. No, that's not, but that's something we need to address.
All right. A couple key words that came out of your comments there was affordability and lack of supply. And those go hand in hand. If you don't have enough supply, but you've got huge demand, obviously the prices go up. That's with any product that's made in our society today. Is there any consideration at the state or federal level to provide incentives, subsidies for this type of housing that you're talking about, and on a local level, maybe eliminating or substantially reducing system development charges, which can be quite substantial in some jurisdictions, $50,000 and up, just to be able to submit a building permit? If we're really looking for affordability and also incentivize supply, is there any programs federally, statewide, or locally that's focusing on that now?
So, Mark, this one's going to be for you, but just a quick comment on that. I know we had a bill that was going to help, but because of the walkout, that went away, but bringing it back again.
Well, federally, we have the low-income housing tax credits, which incentivize builders to go out and develop, but it's not specific to our aging population and those types of. So I think legislation at the federal level needs to be introduced to get ahead of this tsunami, because it is coming and we can see it on the horizon, but we're doing nothing about it. We're sitting on our beach chairs still. And but at the state level, one of the things we are looking at when you talked about system development charges, I am the new Senate Finance Revenue Chair, and we have revenue sources coming in. One of the things that as a city leader or somebody's on the commission here that's been on the commission knows that it costs money to build these roads, to do the infrastructure, all the rest. I'm looking at, instead of putting a couple $100 million into housing, which is necessary, putting a couple $100 million into a grant program for application so that the cities can apply for it, and then we can get those going. They get the SCC charges. We can actually help replenish those coffers later on after they do that, because now it's the chicken or the egg. Where's the money coming from? So that's one of the mechanisms. The other one is to try to help incentivize. It's the same thing. We need to specifically identify this senior type housing or mechanism, because absent that, it's just open to interpretation of who wants what.
Can I add to that? My best friend wanted to add an ADU on her 7 acres because her father had a heart attack. And there was so much red tape to be able to build that ADU. I mean, she had to like name it an art studio to get it done. We have to have common sense legislation. I mean, that's ridiculous that it's taking forever to get that permit passed because, that they didn't meet certain criteria. So that's something I would definitely ask. We need to liberalize that also with just general housing. I have a 1/4 acre lot in my house. I would love to build an ADU for someone and be able to offer that and rent it out to somebody who needs housing. So we have to think about that as well.
Okay, got a few other questions here. Many wish to age at home, which has been shared by you folks, with hired caregivers. Are there enough caregivers, and how is home caregiving affordable to the average senior whose income exceeds the Medicaid cap? And I might add to that, in the culture that we have today, a lot of family members step up to go ahead and be the caregiver because they just can't afford to pay for a trained person to come in, and they don't qualify for some other programs. We have the child care tax credit. Has it ever been thought of the family care member tax credit? If the daughter says, okay, I'm now going to step up and go take care of my aging parents every single day, that they be provided a subsidy like the child care tax credit to do that.
To you, Theresa. So on the tax credit, there is right now a relative. You can have a relative in your adult care home or your own home and take care of them and get payment from the Oregon.
Is it a payment or is it a tax credit or what is that?
It's an actual payment. So it's small, but you get yeah.
It's something, but it also takes that person. Grab the mic. I was saying is, what we see is a lot of family members saying, oh my gosh, I can't go to work now because I have to take care of my mother. That is problematic. We're taking more people out of the workforce and they're having to take care of their their parents.
And it's a little bit mixed bag too, because you do have families who truly want to honor their parents and care for them that have been a little bit inhibited. Cost of caregivers is $25 to $50 an hour, private and agency. The private caregivers, I do have resources for agencies and private caregivers for my clients. Private caregivers are now upping their rates toward the agency rates, which are higher. And it's far and few between. There's just not enough. On average, it's a 2-week wait just to do an assessment for any new client from an agency. So if you're in crisis mode, you're not going to get a caregiver right away, just on average. But as far as the tax credit goes, we cared for my mom in our home for 8 months out of the year, and there is not a federal tax credit for having an aging adult family member living in your home. You have to, and an attorney can correct me on this, you actually have to be a guardian.
That's correct.
I wish all the answers were that easy. Okay, home caregiving is preferable to institutional care in many ways. How are we encouraging home caregiving?
I encourage it all the time. I mean, but the problem is what, okay, perfect example, I have a family that I'm working with, and they wanted to keep mom at home, but there was some cognition issues with dad. So it's probably not the best plan. So now I have to send them to a skilled nursing facility. No, it's always preferred, but we're dealing with families that are, parents are families are taking care of their parents, and then they're out of the workforce, and then they can't sustain their own family. Does that make sense? Like someone my age, so I'm 50, taking care of my mother, but I still have to work, and then maybe I might have a child I have to support. That's a problem. Oh, you do? Oh, you do?
So, hospitals were busy yesterday, let me just tell you. I think I got 6 referrals from the hospitals yesterday. And one family, actually this one came in on Sunday, and this is just a scenario of someone needing care for their father who was just gone on hospice, had about 96 hours to live. The hospital wants to get him out of the hospital. They're taking up space. You need to find them a care home to admit them to. Spoke with the family, the POA, got everything lined up, talked about budget, can't afford it. My mom can't afford that. She can afford $1,200. That's not sustained. That's not going to work. You know, usually in a respite situation, which respite is for hospice care, short-term care under 30 days, it's going to cost you about $10,000. And so
that's a month.
it's a month, and for that stint. Some care homes are flat rates. Some are a daily rate of $400 to $450 a day to care for someone who's on hospice care, end-of-life stages. And so the decision at that point, you know, money is a factor. Family just couldn't care for him at home, but in the end, they had to make the decision to take him home. And family had to rally together and care for him, as uncomfortable as it was for the family.
And that's where I go back to, had this family been educated about, you know what, mom is declining, you should seriously consider applying for Medicaid, you meet that income criteria, because that application can take forever. And in a dying situation, I don't have 45 days for that, you know, that patient. You know, and then they end up living in the hospital, and what quality of life is that?
All right, and kind of staying with the care at home, my mother-in-law, she and her husband paid into home care for about 25 years. Unfortunately, her husband passed within a week of being entered into the hospital, so he never got to use the benefits of the policy. But she now is working with her company called CMAC, I think it is, to go ahead and have the in-home care. But her application was as long as the Medicaid application, and there's a 30-day waiting period. The caregiver has to become qualified, and nothing's happened yet. Do you recommend people enter into these in-home care insurance policies?
You're referring to long-term care?
Yes.
These policies need to be purchased a while ago. They're becoming harder and harder to find. A lot of companies are going out of business, and they're adding more restrictions to their policies, which apparently they can do through the state of Oregon. If you have a long-term care policy, they can submit a request to the insurance, I don't know what it's called, commissioner, to change their policies on payout. So these are things to think about. My husband and I personally have a whole life policy with a long-term care rider, so it has cash value for long-term care. It's a different thing. I cannot personally recommend it, but I can help people use their policy.
Okay.
I actually consulted with a financial planner for myself a year ago, and he told me that those policies are getting extinct. And I think when they came out, they were great, but then people took advantage of them, and there was a lot of claims. So I don't know so much about that, but honestly, just meeting with your financial planner and then evaluating what you can do to set yourself up for that, you know, retirement, and the what ifs. And that's the problem, is a lot of people don't think, oh, I'm never going to break my hip and end up in the SNF and whatnot. I'm just going to be golfing all day. They don't realize this, and especially, so knowledge is power. I always tell my patients, knowledge is power. Make sure you learn about the rules and the education and about Medicaid, and get that sooner than later, as opposed to your client that is now end of life and needing Medicaid replacement.
Well, I think that's just a good practice to have kind of your team around you. So, you know, you've got the attorneys, the financial people, you just want that team in place, because you always want to plan for the what ifs. Ideally, you do spend your days just purely golfing and nothing ever happens, and you don't have to get into any of those situations, but that's not necessarily life, and you just need to have a plan for everything that can happen. You know, plan for best case scenario, you don't need anything, but also something happens tomorrow and you do need some additional care that, you know, is quite expensive. And so just having that plan ahead of time, knowing what's going to happen if this happens, and just always having that team to kind of make sure you've got that in place.
I'm going to let you hold on to the mic for a moment.
Okay.
Question for the attorney. Can you discuss divesting wealth prior to needing long-term care? Can you also talk about the Spousal Impoverishment Act for wealth preservation?
So we don't get too much into kind of the that kind of planning. That's a little bit more specialized, and so we actually have other firms that we send those clients to. But that is something that you do need to be aware of, especially with look-back periods and things like that. You need to really have that plan in place and really start thinking about that early, because you don't just get to transfer things out and the next day say, I'm ready for things. But we do not specialize in that kind of planning, unfortunately.
I do have patients that actually have gone through that where they said, oh, we have no more assets. So what has happened is that they look 5 years back to see what you had, and they will go after you. And they will look in what those assets were, and they will, make that right, whatever right is. And then there's way to also, if you're husband and wife, how you split those assets and what goes to the husband, what goes to the wife, and maybe one of them just needs the care right now. But and make sure have somebody that knows what they're looking at when it comes into insurance policies, because some insurance policies covers one long-term care but not another, and what that the services. So go with somebody that knows what those insurance policies are. Were you gonna say something, Mark?
Okay, and I know we got to wrap up here pretty soon. We talk a lot about Medicaid. How about Medicare? Does Medicare cover anything when it comes to senior care?
Just for rehab, the benefit. Oh, sorry. I was going to say that Medicare will qualify your stay in a rehab facility, and that's very short term. That's the most important thing that you need to think about is a 20-day, and past the 20-day is a copay.
And your copay is typically $500 to $600 a day in a skilled nursing after your 20-day. But Medicare covers your medications, anything that your Medicare normally would cover when you're living at your home, they will cover in an assisted living, a memory care type setting, because it's still medical services.
All right, and I'm going to let each and every one of you have closing comments. Try to keep it less than a minute. What would you like to see happen next in addressing this silver tsunami that's coming our way?
Well, I will say that estate planning is always important, regardless of age. Once you turn 18, it's something you need to start thinking about. You're an adult. If something happens to you, your parents don't get to necessarily make those decisions for you anymore. Estate planning isn't just for the ultra wealthy. A lot of people think that, I don't have millions upon millions, I don't need to do any planning. I just encourage, I think especially through kind of the pandemic and everything that we just saw, we just don't know what's going to happen in life. No one would have predicted that. So just being proactive, start thinking about these things, and kind of have a plan in place.
Mark?
Just continued advocacy to the legislature, because we have the opportunity to make changes, to do the work that's going to help us be prepared in the future here. Right now we are not prepared, whether it be housing, health care, services, and actually funding to help our families to remain housed, especially when they really need additional care. So those are things that Petronella, she's been a great advocate coming and visiting me, and so those are things on my radar, and I'm making those issues aware, making my colleagues aware of those same issues, so we can tackle them and do some productive work to help us be more prepared. So, but stay engaged with us.
I would fully support that 100%. I think we almost need a public service announcement. Honestly. We need a PSA talking about the Medicaid application to streamline this thing. I can't change the staffing in DHS, but some of the things they're dealing with is very archaic. I've been dealing with that for 20 years. They have to streamline this thing. It's embarrassing for me to here's 60 pages, fill it out, and then we'll get, and then you live in the hospital for 45. We can't do that. It is overwhelming, especially in my role as a case manager. This always happens when it's a traumatic situation. We need to do this when we are in our PCP office, but they don't have the bandwidth to deal with that in the clinic. So I would strongly encourage the legislature to look at this, to streamline the thing, to get a public service announcement and to educate these people. Have more forums like this to get the word out, especially instead of having to come to the hospital and I'm sitting with my patient family members for 2 hours walking them through this.
Few things. Obviously, as a senior advisor, I touch on every aspect of what care can be and planning can be. Right now, Clackamas County has closed their applications for adult care homes. I have several adult care homes I would love to place my clients in, but they are on a freeze, so they can't get their licensing, and they're ready to go with staff that they're sitting without being able to open. I would like to see more funding to the adult care homes under the Medicaid contracts to even the number, at least with assisted living reimbursements, if not the memory care reimbursement rates. I think that they do provide such high quality of care, they need to be awarded the same rates as the larger communities. And really just more education on advocacy and what resources are available out there, so.
Can I just say ditto on all of that? I just think, get involved. Know what is out there, because there's, you don't want to be that person. Your loved one had a fall and now has a broken hip and stuck in the hospital. And now what? I get those calls. And Petronella, can you come out here and help this family? They don't know what next is. And then you come and give them that 60-pager, and then you have family members arguing, like, what's going on? So get involved. That's what I would say.
All right. Well, thank you, Petronella. I want to thank all of our panelists. And Tiffany, I want to thank you, too. Thank you also for being our sponsor for today's event. I think you can see we're really just hitting the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the challenges that we're going to be facing in the years to come on this very, very important topic. But at least we know we've got advocates in our corner that are doing the hard work and the heavy lifting for us. And I know, Senator Meek, you'll be very out there as an ambassador leading the charge when it comes to trying to break through at the state and the federal levels. So next month, Tiffany is going to be giving us an update on health care. Pardon me? Brad Henry. Oh, Brad's going to be doing it? Okay, great. But, in addition to senior care, health care is a very, very important topic. I wanted to thank the Abernathy Center's team for another amazing banquet meal. I got to say, it's the best deal in town. But you need to eat the desserts. There's always desserts left over. You got to try them. They're lemon bars this week or this month. But enjoy the rest of our month of August. Going to warm up again into the 90s for the weekend. So get ready to put those T-shirts on again. Thank you all for coming. Feel free to come up and talk with our speakers if you'd like to ask them some additional questions. Thank you.